Hey everyone, welcome back. Have you ever felt like history is giving us an encore presentation?
An encore?
Yeah, like we're listening to a greatest hits album, but instead of music, it's historical events. Today's deep dive is all about the idea that history might not be a straight line forward.
Okay, I'm intrigued. A history remix.
Exactly. We're going deep into The Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe.
I've heard of it. It's about cycles in history.
You got it. They argue that history, especially American history, moves in these repeating cycles. The big idea is this thing called the saeculum.
Oh yeah, a saeculum. It's like roughly a long human lifespan, 80 to 100 years.
Right, and within each saeculum, they say societies go through these, well, eerily similar patterns.
Whoa.
Social trends, cultural shifts, the whole nine yards.
It really makes you rethink that whole progress marches on idea.
Yeah. I know, right? So they're saying that basically every 80 years, give or take, things start to, rhyme. Like we're seeing echoes of the past.
That's the gist, yeah. And it's not like this idea came out of nowhere. The ancient Romans were really into this cyclical view of history.
No kidding. So it wasn't just some ancient myth. They actually used the saeculum as this, marker of societal change.
Yeah, they saw it as both a unit of time and as this cycle of social and political renewal. Each cycle ended with some kind of upheaval, followed by a rebuilding phase, almost like hitting the reset button just on a civilizational scale.
A civilization-wide reset button? That's intense.
Yeah.
But if this idea of history repeating this saeculum thing, if it's been around for so long, why don't we hear about it more often?
Well, it's had its moments, like it had a resurgence during the Renaissance, but I guess it's never really been a mainstream idea.
It makes you wonder why not, though. It's not like it's totally out there. Even Winston Churchill, a guy who practically breathed history, seemed to get it.
What do you mean?
He once said, "The farther backward you look, the farther forward you are likely to see." Pretty profound, right?
Definitely makes you think.
And that's what I find so fascinating about this whole deep dive. It challenges the way we usually see things. It's like, what if, instead of history being this straight line, it's more like a spiral? What if by looking back, we can actually catch a glimpse of what's ahead?
And maybe even be better prepared for it, right?
Exactly. Okay, now you really got me hooked. So do Strauss and Howe give us any concrete examples of this whole saeculum thing playing out? Is there any real evidence to back it up?
Oh, absolutely. Strauss and Howe lay out quite a few historical examples. Actually, remember those ancient Romans we were talking about?
Reset button, folks.
Yeah. Well, they didn't just mark time with the saeculum. They actually used it to kind of guide their social and political life. Like, they believed each cycle ended in upheaval, but then there'd be this period of rebuilding.
So it's like they were aware of the cycle and tried to, work with it.
Exactly. They saw it as a natural part of their civilization's lifespan.
Wow. That's a pretty different way of looking at things. Okay, so that's the ancient Roman take. But did anyone else pick up on this whole cycle thing?
Well, if you fast forward to, say, Anglo-American history, you'll find some interesting stuff there. This historian, Arnold Toynbee, he noticed these distinct cycles of war and peace in Europe.
Really? How long were the cycles?
Roughly a century each. Like a century of conflict, followed by a century of relative peace.
Wow, a whole century. That's wild. It's hard to even imagine that kind of time scale,
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting for us, as Americans. This pattern crisis and recovery, it's not just a European thing. The authors of The Fourth Turning, they saw it happening in American history, too.
Okay, now you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
So what kind of events are we talking about? What are some examples of this cycle in America?
Well, think about some of the big turning points in American history. The American Revolution, for one.
Okay, makes sense. A major crisis, for sure.
Then you have the Civil War, another massive upheaval. Then the Great Depression and World War II. And even the social revolutions of the 1960s and 70s, what they call the consciousness revolution.
When you put it like that, it is kind of eerie. It's like clockwork. Crisis rebuilding, then a new crisis pops up. So if this pattern is so consistent, what's driving it? Is it just random, or are Strauss and Howe saying there's something more at play here?
That is the million-dollar question, and they definitely have some thoughts on it. They believe these cycles are driven by, get this, the interplay of generations.
Generations? Wait, you mean like baby boomers, millennials, Gen Z, all that?
Exactly.
Hold on. Are you saying that our birth year somehow determines the fate of the nation? Because that's a lot of pressure.
I know, right? Well, it's a little more nuanced than that, thankfully. They break each saeculum down into 4 distinct turnings, okay? Each turning has its own kind of mood, its own set of challenges, and these turnings, they shape the generations that live through them.
Okay, now you're just using too many big words for me. Turnings, moods. Give me the Spark Notes version.
Okay. Picture it like this. Within each 80-year cycle, you've got a high, an awakening, an unraveling, and then a crisis.
Okay, I'm visualizing. So what happens during these turnings?
Well, each one is associated with a specific generational archetype. Think of it like broad personality types that kind of emerge in response to what's happening in the world.
Archetypes. Like, are we talking like Myers-Briggs here, but for historical eras?
Kind of. So you've got your prophets, your nomads, your heroes, and your artists.
Okay. I'm following so far. Each one has their own, like, deal, right? Their own thing.
Exactly. Each archetype embodies certain values, characteristics. They play specific roles in society.
All right, hit me with it. What's the cheat sheet on these archetypes? What makes each one tick?
Okay, so prophets, they're the big thinkers, the idealists. They're born during a high. Then you've got nomads. These are your pragmatic, independent types. Awakenings, that's their jam. Then come the heroes, powerful, action-oriented. They come of age during an unraveling. And lastly, you've got your artists. They're the sensitive, adaptable souls. They thrive during a crisis.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So to use a real-world example, would, like, the GI generation, the ones who fought in World War II, would they be considered heroes in this system?
Totally. They're like the textbook example of heroes, shaped by the crisis of the Depression in World War II, embodying courage, duty, all that.
Wow. It's really interesting, how each turning kind of leaves its mark on a generation. Like, it shapes their worldview, and then they carry that with them, and it influences the next generation. It's like this back and forth between history and generations. It's pretty mind-blowing. But it also makes you wonder, where do WE fit into all of this? Where's America at right now in this grand cycle? Are we about to hit a turning point? And so we've got these cycles, these turnings, generations, archetypes. There's a lot to wrap your head around.
Definitely a lot to unpack.
But it's totally fascinating. But like the million-dollar question here is, where does America fit into all of this right now? Like, are we on the upswing? Are we headed for a downturn?
Well, that's what Strauss and Howe were trying to figure out, right? Back in '97, when they wrote the book, they took a look at where America was, and they made a bit of a prediction.
Okay, so what did they say? What did they think was coming next?
Well, they weren't exactly breaking out the champagne. Their analysis was that America was heading into an unraveling phase, basically teetering on the edge of a potential crisis, what they call a fourth turning.
Unraveling. Doesn't sound great. What were they seeing that made them think things were, about to unravel?
Well, they pointed to a few key things, like declining social trust. They were seeing this trend of people just not trusting each other as much, And then a widening gap between the rich and the poor, and also increasing political polarization. Sound familiar at all?
Wait a second. Are you telling me they predicted culture wars back in 1997?
It's pretty remarkable, right? They saw all this happening decades ago, and, it's hard to deny that it has some relevance today. But that wasn't all. They also predicted that there would be this catalyst event, something that would really shake things up and usher in a period of intense crisis.
So it's not just a slow unraveling. It's more like we're heading for an earthquake.
That's the idea. They believed it would be this major turning point, something that would force everyone to really confront some hard truths about America, about where we're headed as a country.
Okay, that's both fascinating and slightly terrifying all at the same time. But if this cycle is a real thing, if we're headed for another one of these fourth turnings, does that mean there's nothing we can do? Like, are we all just along for the ride?
That's where I think understanding this theory becomes really powerful. Strauss and Howe weren't saying, hey, everyone, give up, it's all predetermined. They actually believed that by understanding these cycles, we could be better prepared, that we could make better choices individually and together. Knowledge is power and all that.
So it's less about predicting the future perfectly and more about understanding the possibilities.
Yeah.
Understanding the potential challenges and then using that knowledge to figure out how to navigate whatever's coming next.
Exactly. Think of it like this. History might rhyme, but that doesn't mean it has to be a word-for-word repeat. We have choices. We have the power to shape the future.
I like that. So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway for listeners who are hearing all of this maybe for the first time?
Well, I think the big question that Strauss and Howe pose, and it's a question they actually end their book on, is this. Given everything we've been talking about, given this cyclical view of history, given that we might be entering into this period of really profound change, what role are you going to play?
Wow. That's a powerful question. It's a call to action, really.
It really is. It reminds us that we're not just passive bystanders in history. We're active participants. The choices we make, the things we do, they all play a role in shaping the future.
Absolutely. So as we look ahead to the future, it's on us to ask ourselves, what role do we want to play in this next chapter? What kind of future do we want to help create?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that is a wrap on our deep dive into the fourth turning. Big thanks to you for breaking down these really complex ideas with us. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to check out our show notes for more info and resources. Until next time, remember, history might rhyme, but the future, that's still unwritten. We'll see you next time.